Insects were the first animals to achieve powered flight. So they were able to fly before things like pterosaurs, which were the first vertebrates to be able to achieve flight. And there's convincing evidence that the wings only evolved once before the adaptive radiation of insects into land. Okay, so even though there are no fossils of transitional wings that have been discovered, but what they do know is that the wings did not evolve from the jointed limbs in arthropods. They they occur as unjointed extensions of the dorsal cuticle. And if you remember, the dorsal cuticle is on the backside of the animal. Or sorry, the dorsal part of the animal is the backside. The cuticle is the outermost covering for arthropods because it's above the exoskeleton. Okay, and what you see is that wings have been modified or secondarily lost many times. So, for example, when you see things like this crane fly here, instead of having the hind wings, what they have are modified structures that are called halteres that they use during flight. So a crane fly looks like a just like a big mosquito if you've ever seen one. Usually when people see crane flies, they mistake them for mosquitoes, but if it's big enough for you to see, it's a crane fly. It's not a mosquito. Okay, so now going into arthropod taxonomy. So there are four major lineages. There's the myriapods, insects, crustaceans, and the chelicerates. The myriapods have relatively simple bodies. They have the head region and a long trunk region, okay, with either one pair or two pairs of legs per segment. So the head region is just this portion, and everything else would be the trunk of the animal. And so if it's a centipede, it's going to have one pair of legs per segment. If it's a millipede, it will have two pairs of legs. Because in millipedes, what happened is that some of those segments fuse together. Some of the adjacent segments fuse together. So that's why they have two pairs of legs per segment. And for myriapods, some of them have no eyes. Others have many simple eyes that are clustered on the sides of the head. So they look like little dots. But they're called simple eyes because they only have one lens. Just like humans, we only have one lens. Insects have three tagmata. They have the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. And they also have three pairs of walking legs that extend from the thorax. So when you look at an insect uh, body, wherever you see the legs attached, that's the thorax of the animal because they're only attached to the thorax, not the head and not the abdomen. The head has also four pairs of mouthpart structures and one pair of slender antennae. And they also have a pair of compound eyes. So they have multiple lenses that they use to detect light. There's about 1 million species of insects that have been named so far, but researchers are fairly certain that there are more because the insects dominate terrestrial environments, and also some of them have larvae that are common in freshwater and aquatic environments. So things like dragonflies, which have larvae that are typically found in water, or damselflies or mosquitoes. The crustaceans, they live primarily in aquatic environments where they have their ecological roles, but there's also some that are terrestrial. Okay, so like the pill bugs or the that are also called roly-polies or wood lice. And in the water, there's a lot of planktonic copepods. So these are the ones that consume phytoplankton, and they're important part of food webs because they're the food that fish eat, and then some marine mammals feed on the fish. Crustaceans, they have a segmented body that's divided into three tagmata: the head, thorax, and abdomen. But some species have a carapace, which is a plate that's on the that's formed above the exoskeleton, and this causes the and in this case the head and the thorax are fused, so they have a cephalothorax and an abdomen. And what you see in crustaceans is that they have appendages that are usually branched. Okay. However, you do see some cases where they lose that branching. For the chelicerates, these animals have two tagmata as well. They have the cephalothorax, which is also known as the prosoma, and the abdomen, which is also known as the opistosoma. And the reason that you see that they have different names here is because even though they're called the same thing, the cephalothorax of a chelicerate and the cephalothorax of a crustacean are not homologous. They have the same function, but um, it's not a shared, derived characteristic that they got from an ancestral group. And also, the cephalothorax lacks antennae in chelicerates. Yeah. Now moving on to arthropod metamorphosis. So there's two types of metamorphosis. There's the incomplete metamorphosis, where you have a form of direct development. So you have juveniles that are called nymphs that look like mini versions of the adult. So things like aphids, you could see that, where you have the little nymph, uh, immature insects that just look like the small version of the adult. You can also see this in other insects like grasshoppers. Okay, so that was incomplete metamorphosis. Then there's also complete metamorphosis where you have distinct larval stages. So this would be like fly maggots, right? You have it's the larval form that changes into a very distinct adult stage. Other examples would be like butterflies because they have the caterpillars, or bees. They also have larval stages. Beetles. So for example, the newly hatched mosquito larvae live in fresh water and they suspend feed on microbes. And then they will undergo metamorphosis. They'll change into a pupa form or a protective pupa form, and then they'll completely remodel their bodies and emerge as the adult form. Okay, so here you can see the mosquito larvae, the pupa form, and then the adult form. Okay, so that's complete metamorphosis. Complete, complete metamorphosis is 10 times more common than incomplete metamorphosis. And some of the hypotheses is that This allows for feeding efficiency because the adults larval um, and the larval juveniles won't compete for the same food resources. The other hypothesis is that it's based on advantages of functional specialization, where the larval form is specialized for feeding, while the adult form would be specialized for dispersal or mating, or you know, or both. Okay, so that is the end of the protostomes. Okay, so next time we will continue with deuterostomes.